I never thought a few decorative planters on my front porch would lead to a full-blown war with my homeowner association. But that's exactly what happened on that bitter cold Tuesday morning in January. My name is Trevor Lancaster, and I live in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision just outside Cincinnati, Ohio. I bought my house 3 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a decent front porch that gets good morning sunlight. I'm a landscaper by trade, which means I take pride in how my property looks year-round. That winter, I decided to set up some container gardens on my porch to add color during the dreary months. Nothing crazy, just some evergreen arrangements in large ceramic pots with winter pansies, ornamental kale, and some tasteful decorative branches. Beautiful stuff that any garden magazine would feature. I was checking the moisture levels in the soil that Tuesday morning, making sure the pansies weren't getting too dry from the indoor heat radiating through my front door, when I heard the clicking of heels on my driveway. I looked up to see Barbara Hendricks, the HOA president, marching toward me with that pinched expression she always wore when she thought someone was breaking one of her precious rules. "Good morning, Barbara," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on my jeans. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she stopped at the bottom of my porch steps and pointed at my containers like they were some kind of toxic waste. "Those need to go." I blinked. "Excuse me, those containers. They're not approved. You didn't submit a modification request to the Architectural Review Committee." I looked at my beautiful winter arrangements, then back at her. "Barbara, these are seasonal planters. They're temporary decorations, just like Christmas lights or a wreath. Nobody needs approval for seasonal decorations." Her face reddened. "These are permanent structures. They're containers that are placed on your property, and according to our covenants, any modification to the exterior appearance of your home requires written approval. They're pots, Barbara, flower pots. I can move them with my bare hands." To demonstrate, I picked up one of the smaller ones and set it down a foot to the left. "That's irrelevant. The covenant says exterior modifications, and these constitute modifications. I'm giving you 48 hours to remove them, or I'll be filing a violation with the board and we'll start assessing daily fines." I felt my jaw tighten. I deal with unreasonable clients sometimes in my landscaping business, but this was my home. "Barbara, I've read the covenants. Seasonal decorations are explicitly excluded from the modification approval process. It's right there in Section 12, subsection C. I've been the president of this HOA for 7 years, Trevor. I know what the covenants say better than you do. These are not seasonal decorations. They're landscaping features, and they require approval. 48 hours. She turned on her heel and walked back toward her car, which she'd parked in front of my house. I stood there on my porch, holding a container of purple pansies and ornamental kale, feeling my blood pressure rising. This was insane. I'd seen neighbors with far more elaborate displays that stayed up year-round, and Barbara had never said a word. Old Mrs. Chen, 3 doors down, had a full collection of garden gnomes that had been there since before I moved in. The Robinsons across the street had permanent planters built into their front steps. After Barbara drove away, I went inside and pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. I'd read them when I bought the house, but I wanted to be absolutely certain. Sure enough, Section 12, subsection C clearly stated that seasonal decorations and temporary displays did not require Architectural Review Committee approval, provided they were in good taste and properly maintained. My winter containers definitely qualified. I decided to wait and see if Barbara was bluffing. 2 days later, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. According to the letter, I was in violation of Section 8, paragraph 2 of the covenants, which dealt with landscaping modifications. The letter stated that I had 10 days to remove the containers or face daily fines of $50 until compliance was achieved. I called my neighbor, Pete Morrison, who'd had his own run-ins with Barbara over the years. Pete was a retired attorney who'd moved to Meadowbrook Estates 5 years ago and had quickly learned that Barbara ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom. "She's done this before," Pete told me over the phone. "She interprets the covenants however suits her mood. Last year, she tried to fine the Johnsons for painting their shutters forest green instead of hunter green, said it violated the approved color palette. The Johnsons had to hire an attorney to prove that forest green was within the acceptable range. So what should I do?" "Well, you can fight it through the HOA's internal dispute process, but that's rigged in Barbara's favor since she controls the board. Or you can ignore her and see if she actually follows through with the fines. Or," he paused, "you could go over her head." "What do you mean?" "Call the city zoning department. If your containers really do comply with seasonal decoration exemptions, and if Barbara tries to enforce a violation against you, she might be overstepping. Plus, sometimes having an official city inspector come out and approve something shuts down HOA nonsense real quick." I thanked Pete and considered my options. I didn't want to escalate things, but I also wasn't going to let Barbara bully me into removing decorations that were completely within my rights to display. The next morning, I called the Cincinnati zoning department and explained my situation. The woman who answered was sympathetic. "We get calls about HOA disputes pretty regularly. Let me transfer you to Inspector Mike Chen. He handles these kinds of situations." Inspector Chen picked up after 2 rings. He had a deep, friendly voice that immediately put me at ease. "Mike Chen speaking." I explained the whole situation, including the covenant language about seasonal decorations and Barbara's insistence that my winter containers required approval. "Okay, so first thing to understand is that HOAs are private organizations, and usually we don't get involved in covenant disputes," Inspector Chen said. "However, if the HOA is trying to enforce something that contradicts city code, or if there's a question about whether something constitutes a zoning violation, that's where we come in. Can you send me photos of these containers?" I took several pictures of my porch from different angles and emailed them to Inspector Chen while we were still on the phone. I heard him clicking through the images. "These are just decorative planters," he said. "There's no permanent foundation, no structural modification to the building, nothing that would require any kind of permit or zoning approval. In fact, these are exactly the kind of seasonal displays that most city codes explicitly allow. Let me do some research on your HOA's covenants and see if they are overreaching here. What's the name of your subdivision?" "Meadowbrook Estates." "Got it. I'll look into this and give you a call back within a couple of days. In the meantime, don't remove those containers. If this goes the way I think it will, you're going to want everything exactly as it is for documentation." I felt a weight lift off my chest. Having an official city inspector take my side was encouraging, even if he hadn't made any promises yet. I thanked him and hung up, then went about my day. I had clients to meet and winter prep work to supervise at various properties around Cincinnati. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was finishing up a consultation with a client in Mason. It was Inspector Chen. "Trevor, I've reviewed your HOA's filed covenants and your photos. I also pulled up the city code regarding temporary structures and seasonal displays. Your containers absolutely fall under the seasonal decoration exemption. The HOA president is misinterpreting their own covenants. I'd like to come out and do an official inspection if that works for you. Once I issue a written determination that your containers comply with all applicable codes and fall under the covenant exemptions, the HOA shouldn't have grounds to fine you. That would be amazing. When can you come out? How about tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. Perfect. I'll be there. I couldn't help the satisfied smile that crossed my face. Barbara had picked the wrong fight this time. When I got home that evening, I noticed a new letter taped to my door. This one was from the HOA's attorney, threatening legal action if I didn't remove the containers within 5 days. The letter claimed that I was in willful violation of the covenants and that the HOA would seek monetary damages in addition to compliance. I photographed the letter and emailed it to Inspector Chen with a note. "They're escalating." He responded within an hour. "Good. More documentation. See you tomorrow." That night, I barely slept. Part of me was excited about the inspector's visit, but another part was worried about how Barbara would react. She wasn't the type to back down gracefully, and I knew this would humiliate her in front of the neighborhood. The next morning, I was on my porch by 9:30, making sure everything looked perfect. The containers were well maintained, the plants healthy, everything tasteful and attractive. At exactly 10 o'clock, a white city vehicle pulled up in front of my house. Inspector Chen got out, carrying a clipboard and a camera. He was a stocky Asian man in his 50s with graying hair and an easy smile. "Trevor, that's me. Thanks for coming out." We shook hands and he immediately started examining the containers. He took photos from multiple angles, measured the dimensions of the pots, and checked that they weren't attached to the house structure in any permanent way. "These are textbook seasonal displays," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "No permanent modifications. Easily removable, well-maintained, appropriate for the season. There's absolutely nothing here that would require zoning approval or HOA architectural review under the covenant exemptions for seasonal decorations." As he was finishing his inspection, I saw Barbara's silver sedan come around the corner. She must have been watching for the city vehicle, because she pulled up behind Inspector Chen's truck with a screech of brakes and practically jumped out of her car. "What's going on here?" she demanded, storming up my driveway. Inspector Chen turned to face her calmly. "I'm conducting a zoning inspection. Are you the property owner?" "I'm the HOA president. This homeowner is in violation of our covenants and I don't know why the city is involved." The homeowner requested an inspection to verify compliance with city code and to get an official determination regarding the nature of these displays. "May I ask your name?" "Barbara Hendricks." "And these containers are permanent landscaping features that require approval from our architectural review committee. They violate our covenants." Inspector Chen consulted his clipboard. "Mrs. Hendricks, I've reviewed your HOA's filed covenants. Section 12, subsection C provides a clear exemption for seasonal decorations and temporary displays. These containers fall squarely within that exemption." Barbara's face flushed. "That's not for you to interpret. The HOA covenants are a private matter between the association and homeowners." "Normally, that's correct," Inspector Chen said, his voice remaining professional and calm. "However, when a homeowner requests a city inspection to verify code compliance, and when an HOA may be overreaching its authority in a way that contradicts city ordinances, the city has an interest in providing clarity. Based on my inspection, these containers comply with all applicable city codes and fall under the covenant exemptions. I'll be issuing a written determination to that effect. This is outrageous. The city has no business interfering with our private covenants." "The city isn't interfering with your covenants, Mrs. Hendricks. I'm simply providing an official determination of fact regarding the nature of these displays. Mr. Lancaster is entitled to request such an inspection." Barbara turned to glare at me. "You're going to regret this, Trevor. The HOA will fight this determination, and will make sure every penny of legal fees comes out of your pocket." "Mrs. Hendricks," Inspector Chen interrupted, his tone sharpening slightly. "I'd advise against threatening the homeowner. What I'm providing is a factual determination based on observable evidence and applicable codes. If you disagree with it, you're welcome to file an appeal through the proper channels." She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she spun around and marched back to her car. But before she left, she pulled something from her trunk. It was a large sign, bright yellow with red letters, that read, "This property is in violation of HOA covenants." "You can't put that in my yard," I said, stepping forward. Barbara ignored me and walked toward my front lawn, clearly intending to stake the sign right in the middle of my grass. "Mrs. Hendricks, stop," Inspector Chen said, his voice sharp with authority. Barbara paused, holding the sign. "The HOA has the right to post violation notices on properties that are out of compliance. You have documentation authorizing the placement of that sign. Because if not, you'd be posting an unauthorized sign on private property, which would be trespassing. Additionally," he stepped closer and examined the sign, "this appears to be a violation of city sign ordinances. These types of signs require permits and can only be placed by property owners or with explicit written permission. It's an HOA notification sign. I don't see anything in your filed covenants that authorizes the HOA to place physical signs on private property without owner permission. And regardless of HOA authorization, you still need to comply with city sign ordinances." He pulled out his phone and took several photos of the sign. "What are the dimensions of this sign?" Barbara looked flustered. "I don't know. It's just a standard notification sign." Inspector Chen pulled a measuring tape from his belt and measured the sign. 3 feet by 2 feet. That's over the limit for temporary signage without a permit. "Mrs. Hendricks, do you have a city permit for this sign?" "I don't need a permit for an HOA sign." "Actually, you do. Any sign over 2 square feet placed on private property requires either a permit or explicit property owner permission. Since Mr. Lancaster clearly doesn't give permission, and you don't have a permit, placing this sign would be a violation of City Code Section 41-15. Barbara's face went from red to nearly purple. "This is ridiculous. The HOA has been posting these signs for years." "Then the HOA has been in violation of city code for years. I'm going to issue a citation to the HOA for this sign right now. The fine is $250 for a first offense. If there are other similar signs posted in the subdivision, I'll need to inspect those as well, and each one will incur a separate fine." I watched as Inspector Chen pulled out a citation pad and began filling out a form. Barbara stood there, still holding the sign, looking like she couldn't quite process what was happening. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "None of this would have happened if you just followed the rules." "I am following the rules," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You're the one who misinterpreted the covenants and then tried to post an illegal sign." Inspector Chen handed the citation to Barbara. "Mrs. Hendricks, the HOA has 30 days to pay this fine. Additionally, I'm going to need to conduct a full inspection of the subdivision to identify any other unpermitted signs. If I find more, each will incur a separate citation." "You can't do this." "I absolutely can, and I'm required to by city ordinance. When a code violation is identified, I'm obligated to investigate the full scope of the violation." He turned to me. Mr. Lancaster, I'll email you the official inspection report within 48 hours. Keep a copy for your records. If the HOA continues to threaten you with fines over these containers, you can refer them to my report and, if necessary, file a complaint with the city. Thank you, Inspector. Barbara threw the sign into her trunk with a clatter and got into her car. She peeled out of my driveway, leaving rubber marks on the street. After Inspector Chen left, I went inside and collapsed on my couch. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline. I couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated. What started as a simple disagreement about flower pots had turned into the HOA getting cited by the city. I called Pete and told him everything that happened. He laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Oh man, Barbara must be losing her mind. She's probably called an emergency board meeting already. Do you think this will blow over, or is she going to come after me harder? Hard to say with Barbara. She's prideful, so getting shown up by a city inspector in front of a homeowner isn't going to sit well. But she's also practical enough to know when she's cornered. If the city inspector officially determines your containers are fine, she doesn't have much legal ground to stand on. And now that the HOA's been cited for the sign violation, she's got bigger problems. Pete was right. Over the next few days, Inspector Chen sent me the official inspection report, which clearly stated that my winter containers were seasonal decorations that required no permits or HOA approval. He also sent a follow-up email letting me know that he'd conducted an inspection of the entire Meadowbrook Estates subdivision and found 16 additional unpermitted violation signs posted on various properties. The HOA was cited for each one, bringing their total fines to $4,250. I forwarded the inspection report to Barbara and the HOA board, with a polite email stating that I expected the violation notice against me to be rescinded immediately. I didn't hear back for almost a week. During that week, things got weird in the neighborhood. Some of my neighbors gave me thumbs up when they saw me outside. Others avoided eye contact. Mrs. Chen brought me a plate of cookies and thanked me for standing up to that tyrant. But I also noticed a couple of neighbors whispering and pointing at my house when they thought I wasn't looking. The tension came to a head at the next monthly HOA meeting. I normally didn't attend these things. They were usually boring discussions about landscaping maintenance and pool schedules, but Pete convinced me to show up. You need to be there, he said. Barbara's going to try to spin this somehow, and you need to defend yourself. The meeting was held in the subdivision's clubhouse, a small building near the community pool. When I walked in, about 30 people were already seated in folding chairs facing a table where Barbara sat with 4 other board members. The moment I entered, conversation stopped and everyone turned to look at me. I took a seat near the back, next to Pete. Barbara glared at me but didn't say anything until the meeting was called to order. The first 20 minutes were standard stuff: budget reports, upcoming maintenance schedules, a discussion about repainting the clubhouse. Then Barbara cleared her throat. We need to address the incident that occurred 2 weeks ago involving Trevor Lancaster and his ongoing covenant violations. I raised my hand. Point of order. There are no ongoing covenant violations. The city zoning inspector determined that my winter containers are seasonal decorations exempt from architectural review. Barbara's jaw clenched. The city inspector's opinion doesn't supersede our covenants. It's not an opinion. It's an official determination based on code compliance and covenant interpretation. I have the written report. One of the other board members, a thin man named Donald Wheeler, spoke up. Barbara, if the city inspector issued an official report saying the containers don't violate code or covenants, I'm not sure we can continue claiming their violations. The covenants are clear, Barbara insisted. Any exterior modification requires approval. Pete stood up. Barbara, I'm a retired attorney and I've read the covenants thoroughly. Section 12, subsection C explicitly exempts seasonal decorations. Trevor's containers fall under that exemption. If you continue pursuing this, you're opening the HOA up to a lawsuit for harassment and selective enforcement. A murmur went through the room. Another board member, a woman named Linda something I couldn't remember her last name, leaned toward Barbara and whispered something. Barbara shook her head stubbornly. The board has voted, and we've determined that these containers constitute permanent landscaping features. When did the board vote on this? Pete asked. Because if you held a vote without proper notice and quorum, that's a violation of your own bylaws. Barbara's face reddened again. We had an emergency meeting. Did you provide 72 hours notice to all board members as required by the bylaws? Silence. Donald Wheeler looked uncomfortable. Barbara, I didn't get notice of any emergency meeting. Neither did I, Linda said. Pete sat down with a satisfied expression. So not only is the violation notice against Trevor baseless, but the board's decision to pursue it was made improperly. This whole thing is a mess, Barbara. Another resident raised her hand, a younger woman I'd seen around but never spoken to. I have a question. Why did the city cite the HOA for all those violation signs? My husband and I got one of those signs on our lawn last year when we put up a basketball hoop, and now you're saying they were illegal. Barbara shuffled papers on the table. That's a separate issue. It's not a separate issue, the woman insisted. You've been putting up illegal signs on people's property for years. That's trespassing. And now the city's fining the HOA, which means you're using our dues money to pay for fines that you caused. The murmur in the room grew louder. People were getting agitated. I could see Barbara losing control of the meeting. The signs were used to notify residents of violations, Barbara said, her voice rising. It's a standard HOA practice. Not without permits, it's not, Pete said, and not without property owner permission. The city inspector was right to cite you. Donald Wheeler cleared his throat. Barbara, I think we need to table this discussion and consult with the HOA attorney before proceeding. This situation is getting out of hand. I am proceeding exactly as I should, Barbara snapped. Trevor Lancaster has caused this entire mess by refusing to comply with a simple request. If he had just removed his containers like I asked, none of this would have happened. I stood up. Barbara, you asked me to remove seasonal decorations that are explicitly allowed by the covenants. When I proved they were allowed, you tried to put an illegal sign on my property. You caused this mess, not me. You called the city inspector because you were threatening to fine me $50 a day for decorations that I had every right to display. What was I supposed to do, just let you bully me? Barbara stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. I have been president of this HOA for 7 years, and I will not be spoken to like this in my own meeting. It's not your meeting, Pete said calmly. It's the homeowners' meeting. You just run it. Linda touched Barbara's arm. Maybe we should take a break. No. Barbara grabbed her papers and stuffed them into her bag. This meeting is over. The board will reconvene and make final decisions about Mr. Lancaster's violations without interference from the peanut gallery. She stormed out of the clubhouse. The other board members looked at each other uncertainly, then Donald Wheeler stood up. Let's take a 30-minute recess and reconvene to finish the scheduled business, he said. The issue with Trevor's containers is tabled pending legal consultation. People broke into small groups, talking animatedly. Several neighbors came up to me to voice their support. Others complained about their own experiences with Barbara's overreach. One elderly man told me about how Barbara had tried to fine him for having his garage door open too long while he was unloading groceries. "She's out of control," he said. Someone needed to stand up to her. When the meeting reconvened, Barbara didn't return. Donald Wheeler ran the rest of the meeting, which was awkward and brief. Afterwards, Pete and I walked out to the parking lot together. "That went about as well as could be expected," Pete said. "Barbara's not going to let this go, though. She'll try to find some other way to come after you." "What can she do?" The city inspector cleared me. "She can make your life difficult in little ways. Scrutinize every other thing about your property, file nuisance complaints, try to rally other board members against you. She's petty like that." Pete was right to be concerned. Over the next few weeks, I received 3 more violation notices from the HOA. One claimed my grass was a 1/4 inch too long. Another said my mailbox needed repainting. The third complained that I was parking my work truck in my driveway overnight, which supposedly violated a covenant about commercial vehicles. I documented everything and sent copies to Inspector Chen, just to keep a record. He replied that the city couldn't do anything about HOA harassment unless there were actual code violations, which there weren't. He suggested I consult with an attorney about a harassment claim against the HOA. I didn't want to sue the HOA. Despite everything, these were my neighbors and I had to live here. But Barbara was making that increasingly difficult. The situation came to a head in early March when I came home from work to find another sign on my lawn. This one was even bigger than the first, a 4-foot by 3-foot monstrosity that read, "This property owner has repeatedly violated HOA covenants and refuses to comply." I took photos immediately and called Inspector Chen. He answered on the second ring. They did it again. He asked when I explained. "Bigger sign this time." "That's a $500 fine for a second offense. And if this is the same person placing the signs, we're getting into harassment territory. I'll be out in 30 minutes. True to his word, Inspector Chen arrived half an hour later. He photographed the sign, measured it, and checked the subdivision records to confirm there was no permit. "This is egregious," he said. "Not only is it a larger, unpermitted sign, but the content is potentially defamatory. You should consider talking to a lawyer about a civil suit." "I just want them to leave me alone." "I understand, but at some point, you need to protect yourself. This kind of harassment can affect your property value and quality of life." He wrote out another citation. "I'm going to deliver this personally to the HOA office. Do you know where Mrs. Hendricks lives? 3 blocks over. The big colonial with the circular driveway. I'll serve her with the citation directly. She needs to understand that this behavior has consequences." After Inspector Chen left, I pulled the sign out of my lawn and put it in my garage. I didn't want it visible from the street anymore. Then I sat on my porch and tried to figure out my next move. I loved my house. I'd put a lot of work into making it my own, and the neighborhood was great except for the HOA drama. But Barbara was making it impossible to live here peacefully. My phone rang. It was Pete. I heard Barbara put up another sign. "News travels fast. Small subdivision. Look, I've been talking to some other homeowners who have had problems with Barbara. We're thinking about calling a special meeting to vote her out as president. We need 20% of homeowners to sign a petition requesting the meeting. Are you interested?" Would that actually work? It might. The bylaws allow for removal of board members by majority vote of homeowners. If enough people are fed up with her, we could get her out. Then maybe we can get someone rational in charge who actually follows the covenants instead of making up rules as they go. Count me in. Over the next 2 weeks, Pete organized a petition drive. It turned out a lot of people had grievances against Barbara. Some were legitimate disputes over covenant interpretation. Others were petty complaints like mine. But the common thread was that Barbara had been running the HOA like a dictator, making unilateral decisions without board input and selectively enforcing rules based on personal grudges. We got the required signatures within 10 days. Pete submitted the petition to the board, and a special meeting was scheduled for the first Monday in April. The meeting notice went out to all homeowners, stating that the purpose was to vote on removing Barbara Hendricks as HOA president and possibly from the board entirely. Barbara, of course, lost her mind. She sent an email to all homeowners claiming that I was orchestrating a hostile takeover of the HOA and that the petition was invalid because some signatures were improperly dated. The board reviewed her challenge and determined the petition was valid. The day of the special meeting arrived. I'd never seen the clubhouse so packed. There must have been 70 people crammed into a space designed for 40. Pete had arranged for an independent mediator to run the meeting since Barbara obviously couldn't preside over her own removal vote. The mediator was a professional parliamentarian named Helen Gregory. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who immediately established order. This meeting is called to address a petition signed by 23% of homeowners, requesting the removal of Barbara Hendricks from her position as HOA president and from the board of directors. Mrs. Hendricks, you have 15 minutes to address the homeowners before the vote. Barbara stood up, her face tight with barely controlled anger. She launched into a speech about how she'd dedicated 7 years of her life to the HOA, how she'd worked tirelessly to maintain property values, and how the current situation was the result of a few malcontents who refused to follow simple rules. She specifically called me out. Trevor Lancaster moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago and has been nothing but trouble. He refuses to submit proper applications for modifications. He weaponized the city zoning department against the HOA. He's cost this association thousands of dollars in legal fees and fines, all because he couldn't follow a simple request to remove some flower pots. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I felt my face getting hot. When Barbara finished, Helen Gregory asked if anyone wanted to speak in support of the petition. Pete stood up first. I've lived here for 5 years, and I've watched Barbara abuse her authority repeatedly. She makes up rules that aren't in the covenants. She selectively enforces violations based on personal relationships. She's cost the HOA thousands of dollars, not because of Trevor, but because she placed illegal signs on private property without permits. The city inspector gave Trevor an official determination that his containers were legal. Barbara chose to ignore that and escalate the situation. Mrs. Chen spoke next. Barbara tried to fine me $300 because my grandson's bicycle was visible from the street. She said it was unsightly. It was a child's bicycle in my driveway for 2 days while my grandson visited. That's not about maintaining property values. That's about control. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their stories. The basketball hoop dispute, someone getting fined because their holiday lights weren't taken down exactly on January 2nd. A family threatened with fines because they had a political sign in their window during election season. By the time the speaking portion ended, Barbara looked smaller somehow, hunched in her chair. Helen Gregory called for the vote. All homeowners in favor of removing Barbara Hendricks as HOA president and from the board of directors, please raise your hands. A forest of hands went up. I raised mine too. Helen Gregory counted carefully. All opposed, maybe 10 hands went up, including Barbara's own. The motion passes by a vote of 58 to 11. Mrs. Hendricks, you are removed from the board effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA records, keys, and accounts to the remaining board members within 48 hours. Barbara stood up, her face drained of color. For a moment, I thought she might argue or cause a scene. Instead, she grabbed her purse and walked out without a word. The room was silent until the door closed behind her. Then everyone started talking at once. Helen Gregory called the meeting back to order. The board now needs to elect an interim president. Nominations are open. Donald Wheeler was nominated and elected unanimously. He immediately stood and addressed the crowd. First, I want to apologize on behalf of the board for letting things get so far out of hand. We should have reined in Barbara's behavior long ago. Second, I want to assure everyone that we're going to review all outstanding violations and make sure they're legitimate and properly documented. If anyone has been unfairly cited or fined, please submit a complaint to the board and we'll review it. Trevor, he looked directly at me, your violation notices are rescinded. I apologize for the harassment you've endured. The crowd applauded. I nodded my thanks, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The meeting adjourned around 9 o'clock. As people filed out, several neighbors stopped to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Mrs. Chen hugged me. "You started this," she said. "Thank you for having the courage to stand up." Pete and I walked out to the parking lot together. "That went better than I expected," he said. "You think Barbara will cause more problems?" "Honestly, I think she's done. She's been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Her power base is gone. She'll probably keep to herself now." Pete was mostly right. Barbara did keep a low profile after being removed from the board. I'd see her occasionally driving through the neighborhood, but she never made eye contact. The few times we passed on the street, she'd turn her head away. The new board under Donald Wheeler was a revelation. They actually followed the covenants as written. They didn't make up arbitrary rules. They treated homeowners with respect. Within 2 months, they'd resolved most of the outstanding violation disputes, including refunding some fines that had been improperly assessed. But the story didn't quite end there. In early May, about a month after Barbara's removal, I got a call from Inspector Chen. "Trevor, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've been investigating the HOA's sign violations more thoroughly, and we discovered that Mrs. Hendricks was operating a small business making and selling those violation signs to other HOAs in the area. She never had a business license or the proper permits." "You're kidding." "Nope. She was making these signs in her garage and selling them for a couple $100 each. We've identified at least 15 other HOAs that bought signs from her, and most of those signs were also placed without proper permits. The city attorney's office is considering charges for operating an unlicensed business and possibly fraud, since she was representing these signs as legitimate HOA enforcement tools when they weren't legally compliant." I didn't know what to say. Barbara had been running what amounted to an illegal side business selling HOA violation signs. The irony was overwhelming. "What happens now?" I asked. "The city attorney will decide whether to file charges. At minimum, she'll face significant fines for the business license violations. If they determine she knowingly misrepresented the legality of the signs, she could face fraud charges. I'll keep you updated." 2 weeks later, the local news ran a story about Barbara's sign business. The headline read, "Former HOA president charged with operating unlicensed business, selling illegal signs." The story detailed how Barbara had been making violation signs in her garage and selling them to HOAs throughout the Cincinnati area for 3 years. She'd made an estimated $15,000 from the business without a license or proper permits. The story mentioned Meadowbrook Estates and the dispute over my winter containers. A reporter even called me for a comment, but I declined. I didn't want to pile on Barbara any more than necessary. The legal process moved slowly. Barbara hired an attorney and initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she didn't know she needed a business license for what she considered a hobby. But the evidence was overwhelming. She'd advertised her services on HOA websites and Facebook groups. She'd invoiced clients. She'd kept business records. In July, Barbara pled guilty to operating a business without a license and paid a fine of $5,000. She also had to pay back taxes on the income she'd earned. The fraud charges were dropped as part of the plea agreement, but she was placed on probation for a year. The whole situation became a cautionary tale in the local HOA community. Other neighborhood associations started reviewing their enforcement procedures to make sure they weren't overstepping legal boundaries. Some HOAs even invited city inspectors to do educational sessions about proper procedures for violations and signage. As for me, my winter containers stayed on my porch through March, and when spring arrived, I replaced them with beautiful arrangements of petunias, verbena, and sweet potato vine. Nobody from the HOA said a word. In fact, Donald Wheeler stopped by one afternoon to compliment the displays. "These look great," he said. "You've got a real talent for this, thanks. It's what I do for a living. I've been thinking the subdivision's common areas could use a refresh. Would you be interested in submitting a proposal for a landscaping overhaul? We've got budget allocated for improvements, and after everything that happened, I think you'd do a great job." I ended up landing the contract to redesign the subdivision's entrance landscaping and maintain the common areas. It was a nice, steady gig that kept my crew busy during slower periods. The irony wasn't lost on me that the HOA dispute that started with flower pots ended with me getting hired to do professional landscaping for the subdivision. Barbara moved out of Meadowbrook Estates that fall. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd bought a condo in downtown Cincinnati, a place with no HOA. I ran into her once at a home improvement store in November. We made eye contact across the garden center, and for a moment, I thought she might just turn and leave. Instead, she walked over. "Your containers look nice," she said stiffly. "Thanks. I was wrong about the covenants. I should have double-checked before pushing the issue. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. I appreciate you saying that." She nodded and walked away. That was the last time I ever spoke to Barbara Hendricks. The new board continued to function smoothly. They held regular meetings, communicated clearly with homeowners, and enforced the covenants fairly and consistently. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually went up that year, partly because of improved management and partly because word got around that the neighborhood had gotten rid of its problem HOA president. Pete and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. He helped me navigate some business legal issues with my landscaping company, and I gave him advice on his garden. We'd have beers on his back deck and laugh about the absurdity of the winter container war. "You know what the craziest part is?" Pete said one evening as we watched the sunset. "All of this could have been avoided if Barbara had just listened when you cited the covenant exemption. She was so convinced she was right that she couldn't even consider she might be wrong." "Pride comes before a fall," I said, biblical and accurate. I kept the citation that Inspector Chen had given to Barbara framed in my garage workshop. It was a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself is worth the hassle, even when it seems easier to just give in. My winter containers had become a symbol in the neighborhood, representing the idea that HOA rules had to be reasonable and fairly applied. The next winter, I put up even more elaborate container displays. Nobody complained. In fact, several neighbors asked me to design winter containers for their porches too, which turned into a nice little side business. By the third winter, I was doing container designs for 15 houses in the subdivision. Mrs. Chen told me that the whole incident had changed the culture of Meadowbrook Estates. People weren't afraid of the HOA anymore. They understood their rights and weren't hesitant to speak up when something seemed unfair. The board actually appreciated it because it kept them honest and made sure they were following the rules properly. Inspector Mike Chen and I stayed in touch too. He'd call me occasionally when he got HOA disputes that involved landscaping questions. I'd provide my professional opinion about whether something was truly a permanent structure or just a temporary display. We helped each other out. 3 years after the winter container incident, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I never thought I'd want to be involved in HOA governance after everything that happened. But Donald Wheeler convinced me that the board needed someone who understood both the homeowner perspective and the practical realities of property maintenance. My first vote as a board member was to formally codify the seasonal decoration exemptions in the covenants with clear, specific language that left no room for misinterpretation. The amendment passed unanimously at the next homeowners meeting. I also pushed for the board to adopt a policy requiring that any violation notices be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being sent to homeowners. That way, no single person could use violations as a weapon for personal grudges. The policy was adopted and became a model that other HOAs in the area copied. Looking back, those winter containers taught me something important about communities and how they function. Rules are necessary, but so is common sense and respect. When authority figures lose sight of the purpose behind the rules, they can do real damage to the social fabric of a neighborhood. Barbara's downfall wasn't really about flower pots or signs. It was about someone who let a small amount of power go to their head and forgot that they were supposed to serve the community, not rule it. The fact that she was running an illegal business selling enforcement signs just highlighted how far she'd strayed from the actual purpose of the HOA. As for my containers, they're still on my porch every winter. This year, I did a beautiful arrangement with evergreens, red twig dogwood branches, winter jasmine, and hellebores. They're the first thing visitors see when they come to my house, and they remind me every day that standing up for what's right, even in small things, matters. The neighborhood kids call my house the pretty one with the flowers. Mrs. Chen still brings me cookies every Christmas. Pete and I still have beers on his deck. And the HOA runs smoothly under board leadership that actually respects both the rules and the people they serve. Sometimes, I'll drive past Barbara's old house, which now belongs to a young family with 3 kids. They have a basketball hoop in the driveway, a playhouse in the backyard visible from the street, and seasonal decorations that change with every holiday. Nobody complains. Nobody sends violation notices. The neighborhood has moved on. The whole experience made me appreciate what a good HOA can be and what a bad one can do. It also made me grateful for city officials like Inspector Chen, who understand the balance between private covenants and public interests. Without his intervention, I might still be fighting with Barbara, racking up fines I didn't deserve. My landscaping business thrived too. The publicity from the news story, while awkward at the time, actually brought me clients. People liked the idea of hiring a landscaper who stood up for his principles and knew the rules. I had to hire 2 more employees to keep up with demand. Every winter when I design my containers, I think about that cold Tuesday morning when Barbara first told me they had to go. I remember the frustration, the anger, the stress of fighting the HOA. But I also remember the satisfaction of being proven right, the support of my neighbors, and the positive changes that came from standing firm. Those winter containers, simple decorative planters with seasonal plants, became the catalyst for real change in Meadowbrook Estates. They exposed problems that had been festering for years and gave the community an opportunity to correct course. In a weird way, I'm grateful to Barbara for starting the fight. Without her overreach, the HOA might have continued down a path of arbitrary enforcement and petty tyranny. Instead, we have a neighborhood where people know their rights, where the HOA follows its own rules, and where seasonal decorations are celebrated rather than attacked. My front porch displays every winter stand as a testament to that victory, a colorful reminder that sometimes the smallest battles have the biggest impacts. And somewhere in Cincinnati, in a condo without an HOA, Barbara Hendricks probably drives past houses with winter containers and remembers the fight she picked over flower pots. I hope she learned something from it too. I hope she understands now that authority without accountability is just bullying with a title. As for me, I'm content. My house looks beautiful year-round. My business is successful. My neighborhood is peaceful. And every winter, when I arrange evergreens and pansies and ornamental kale in ceramic pots on my front porch, I smile knowing that these simple decorations represent something much more important than seasonal curb appeal. They represent the right of homeowners to enjoy their property within reasonable rules, the importance of standing up to unjust authority, and the power of community to correct itself when given the chance. The winter containers stay, the neighborhood thrives, and life in Meadowbrook Estates goes on, better than it was before, all because someone tried to turn flower pots into a federal case and lost spectacularly. It's a story I'll tell for years to come, probably embellishing it more each time, but always with gratitude for how it turned out and hope that other homeowners in similar situations find the courage to stand up for themselves too.